Happy morning, my dear students. This is your economics ma'am Mohana Priya here. Yesterday we started with a new chapter, poverty. In that we studied poverty definition, meaning of poverty, and poverty people in poor area and urban area, and common characteristics of poor people. Today we are going to see measure of poverty. Only one concept today, measure of poverty. The problem of poverty can be overcome only when poor people are identified. For identifying these poor people in each countries, we used some kind of measures to find out the poor people in every places. For that, we use two type of measures. One is your relative poverty, the other one is your absolute poverty. First, we are going to see relative poverty. The meaning for the relative poverty is relative poverty refers to a poverty of people in comparison to the other people, regions or nation. I'll say example. Example, if Ram has lower income in comparison to Sham, then we can say that Ram is relatively poor. Now you understood what is relative poverty. That is, importance of this relative poverty is to understand the relative position of different segment of the population. There is also limitation in relative poverty. That is, this position of different segment of population in income hierarchy. It doesn't consider how poor the poor person is or whether he is deprived of the basic minimum requirements of life or not. This was the main limitation, a main critique of relative poverty. Relative poverty is considering only the income hierarchy. It doesn't considering other than income, that is its basic necessity like food, cloth, education, health. It doesn't consider this one. So there is a criticism in relative poverty is it is taken only the income of a population. With the income of population, they are saying whether this people is poverty or not. Understood? Next is your absolute poverty. The meaning for the absolute poverty is refers to the total number of people living below poverty line. Okay, meaning is absolute poverty refers to the total number of people living below poverty line. I'll say one example for you. That is, in a newspaper or in any magazine we can see, according to absolute measure, around 22% of India's population is below poverty line. That is, it will be calculated as a whole. It will not be considered individual. It will be calculated as a whole. The importance of absolute poverty is, why it is very important in the sense, the countries, less developed countries like India, where there is abundance of poverty, it is helped to measure the number of poor people easily. And here also we have a certain limitation, that is, in this absolute poverty, we will only take poor people, very poor people like that, but we'll ignore health, literacy and lack of resources, discrimination, political freedoms. This is limitation in absolute poverty. While I'm saying definition of absolute poverty, do you hear a new word, poverty line? Yeah, of course, you want to know what is poverty line. A poverty line is used as a standard to measure the number of poor people. That is, in a poverty line, a standard is fixed in terms of minimum level of consumption. That is, if there is a person in urban area, this person has to consume this much calorie. If it is in rural area, this person has to consume this much calorie. There will be a fixed consumption level. If those people are below that fixed consumption level, we'll say that those people are poverty people. Understood what is poverty line? Poverty line is a standard to measure a number of poor people. In India, proportion of people living below poverty line gives the absolute measure of poverty. That is, with the poverty line we can easily measure the absolute poverty. For your visual understanding, I attached two videos here. One is your poverty trap, how the poverty trapping the people in different ways. And next is how the poverty can be measured. For your visual understanding, I attached 2 videos. Refer that and complete your assignment and submit to me. Write notes. Don't forget to take notes. Okay, it will be checked during your reopening day. Thank you, children. Bye.
The poverty trap represents the set of events likely to keep an individual in poverty unless an external force, like winning the lottery, intervenes. Why does this trap exist? Let's make it personal. Imagine you're a college student, which you probably are. You may be fortunate enough to own a desktop or laptop computer to help you complete your college assignments. Being able to complete your assignments allows you to complete the course. Completing all your courses allows you to graduate from college and then potentially get a well-paying job. This means that your current investments in things like education will have a positive effect on your future income. In fact, once you graduate, your future income might come close to the highest level it will reach in your life. This means that the money you make today will have an exponential increase on your ability to make money in the future. For each dollar you make, you are able to save and even invest that dollar for the future. In this case, you are investing that dollar in education. However, what would happen if your computer broke and you had to get it fixed? Even as a poor student, you would probably be able to find a way to pay to get your computer fixed. You might have to borrow money or sell something. Regardless, you have many more opportunities to handle financial woes than someone who lives in poverty in a less developed country. For people in extreme poverty, current investments in things like education will not have an immediate positive effect on future income. As you can see from the new graph, money someone makes today doesn't help them make money in the future until they make a certain amount. But why is this different for someone living in poverty in a less developed country? Consider Grace, a poor farmer in Tanzania who raises chickens and sells them to other people in the village. Grace uses the money from selling chickens to pay school fees for her children and to buy food and clothes for them and her husband, who has been sick and unable to work. What little she has left over, she puts into feeding and caring for the chickens, buying medicine to keep them healthy, and maybe even buying baby chicks if she can afford to. In this state, Grace will be able to survive and perhaps even grow her business. She could eventually raise her family out of poverty. Unfortunately, however, things seldom remain stable. The chicken coop will need maintenance, or a child will become sick and need to go to the doctor. School fees will increase, or the cost of food will go up, or the house will need repairs. In most cases throughout the developing world, there is no health insurance, home insurance, or welfare programs to help Grace with these unexpected costs. In any of these situations, because Grace has very little money saved and few options for borrowing, she might have to sell all her chickens or take her children out of school to cover unexpected costs. This puts her back in a similar or worse situation than the one she was in before her financial woes began. This is the poverty trap. It means that if you are very poor, the money you make in the present or the education you receive in the present doesn't necessarily help you make more money in the future because you have no resources to fall back on in the case of a financial setback. Every time something goes well and you are able to save a little money, something comes along and you need to use that money to survive. Many people in the developing world are likely to be stuck in this trap and not able to get out unless some other type of intervention occurs. What this intervention looks like is highly contested among academics, politicians, and even business experts. But one thing is for sure, the poverty trap is real and creates major problems for billions of people, not to mention our entire global economy.
To fight poverty, we must define it and be able to measure it. Poverty is multidimensional. Its harsh reality varies from one nation to another. So how do we measure poverty? We begin by creating a measure of well-being. This shows us the differences in the quality of life across an entire population. Well-being comes from many different things: how much we earn, where we live, what we eat, how much we eat, the things we acquire and use every day, whether we go to school or not, or see a doctor when we are sick. All of these contribute to the quality of life. Consumption and income are two broad categories that do not show all of the dimensions of poverty, but are useful as indicators of well-being. To collect this data, a country will survey many different segments of the population. From the collected data, a range of consumption and income can be created. People with the highest well-being are shown to the far right. They enjoy many goods and services in a wide variety of forms. Those with the lowest well-being are shown to the far left. They have access to limited goods and services. To compare this data, monetary values are usually assigned. There is a point at which the level of income and consumption becomes insufficient to support a good quality of life. Researchers use statistical methods to define that point, which is called the poverty line. The poverty line divides the poor from the non-poor. People in poverty are those whose level of income or consumption is not enough to cover a minimum amount of goods and services. There is also a point that represents the minimum food consumption that can sustain life. That is the extreme poverty line. These points will differ from one country to the next because the circumstances change from country to country. But the process of measuring poverty is consistent. How do we measure how many people live in poverty? When we plot out the population of a country, we see how many people live in poverty and what percentage they represent of the country's entire population. This data reminds us how much work there is to do in fighting poverty, and it actually helps us organize that fight. With this information, we can calculate how many people live below the poverty line. We can start seeing where help is needed most, who needs it, and what types of programs could be effective. We can accurately measure our progress and, more importantly, adjust our plans to empower people so that they can increase income, improve their well-being, and move above the poverty line. So these are not just numbers. They are critical tools in the fight against poverty. That's how we measure poverty and why. Learn more.